picture this. You're a pastor. It's a quiet Saturday morning.
Best time of the week, right?
Exactly. You're drinking your coffee, maybe reviewing your notes for the weekend services, and your phone rings.
Oh, never a good sign on a Saturday morning.
Right. It's the groom for a wedding that you were supposed to officiate in literally just a few hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The church is decorated. The guests are already arriving in town. The caterers are, prepping all the food. And the young man on the other end of the line says, I have to call off the wedding.
Just hours before.
Just hours before he is supposed to stand at the altar. And the reason he gives is just absolutely chilling.
Yeah.
He says that the night before, after yet another terrifying, red-hot, explosive outburst from his fiancée, he realized that her anger was a fatal flaw. He couldn't marry her.
Wow. That's devastating.
It really is. The engagement was completely vaporized at the absolute 11th hour, all because of a fury she refused to control.
It's a devastating story, but frankly, it's also a deeply courageous decision by that groom.
Yeah, I agree.
But the authors of our source material today, Christopher Ashe and Steve Midgley, they actually stated their book, The Heart of Anger, with that specific jarring anecdote for a very distinct reason.
To set the stakes, right.
Exactly, to set the stakes immediately, because, let's be honest, we tend to domesticate anger.
Oh, absolutely. We call it venting or blowing off steam.
Right, or just being passionate. We rebrand it. But the authors are making the case that anger is not merely a bad mood. It is a profoundly destructive force that literally levels human lives.
Yeah, it leaves craters.
It does. And the text introduces this really brilliant overarching metaphor for us to operate from for this deep dive. They say that anger is the drawn sword of human relationships.
The drawn sword. I love that.
Well,
I don't love it, but it really forces you to stop and visualize what's actually happening.
It changes the framing completely.
Because a sword resting in its scabbard, that's safe.
Right.
But drawing a sword is an incredibly deliberate, threatening act. The metaphor kind of, it inhabits that terrifying in-between state.
Yes, that transition moment.
From the very first moment, your hand goes to the hilt in annoyance, to the metallic ring of the blade coming out, all the way to the full-blown, world-destroying strike. It covers the internal feeling and the precipitating action.
And before a sword strikes, and whether that strike is a cutting word to your spouse, or a smashed plate against the wall, or actual physical violence, it has to be drawn first.
Right. It starts internally.
Anger is the emotion that precedes and ultimately precipitates all that destruction. If you trace the casualties in our lives, broken marriages, estranged parents and children, fractured churches, toxic workplaces.
Yeah, all of it.
You will almost always find a drawn sword right at the center of the wreckage.
So our mission for this deep dive today is to take a comprehensive diagnostic look at the human soul using this source material as our guide.
And we really need to clarify what kind of look we're taking.
Yes, because we are going to treat the biblical text as the ultimate sufficient authority for diagnosing our deepest psychological and spiritual issues.
Which is a very specific approach.
It is. The premise here is that the scriptures aren't just giving us behavioral modification tips. If you want a deep dive about how to count to 10 or take deep breaths or visualize a calming beach, this isn't that.
Right. There are plenty of other resources for that.
Yeah.
But that's not what this is.
Exactly. The authors are arguing that the Word of God acts as a scalpel. It cuts down to what is actually broken inside of us at the foundational level, the soul level.
And to do that effectively, we have to read the source text with a very specific lens. We can't just run a surface level, digital word search for anger or wrath.
Because it's not always labeled so neatly.
Precisely. The authors point out that we have to look for the invisible presence of fury in historical narratives.
Give an example of that.
Well, take the Old Testament story of Nabal and David. Nabal is this wealthy rancher, and he deeply insults David. Now, the text doesn't explicitly use the exact word angry to describe David in that split second, but what happens? David immediately turns to his men and commands them to strap on their swords. He is absolutely seething. He is preparing to wipe out an entire household over an insult.
So the drawn sword is literal in that case.
Very literal. And we have to read the narratives watching for the presence of that drawn sword, even when the emotion is entirely unspoken in the dialogue.
That makes a lot of sense. So before we get into the specific triggers, the actual reasons why we reach for the hilt, we need to look at the family tree of human emotion.
The family photo.
Yeah. The text points us toward the Apostle Paul's letter to the Galatians, specifically chapter 5, which lists out this catalog of human vices. The authors treat this list like looking at a mafia family photograph.
Which is a highly effective way to visualize it, isn't it?
It's brilliant.
If you look at Galatians 5 or even similar passages like Romans 1, you see these sweeping lists of human corruption.
Yeah.
And anger is right there in the picture.
Front and center.
We are drawing a little circle around his face today because that's our specific focus. But further along the row in that family portrait, there is sexual immorality, idolatry, sorcery, rivalries, dissensions, and envy.
They're all connected.
They're all part of the same corrupt family. Anger is just one face in an ugly, tightly knit mob.
I'd even take it a step further based on what the authors are saying. Anger is like the loud, obnoxious cousin in the front row demanding all the attention.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. It's the one you have to look at because you are terrified of what it's about to do to you. It's screaming, it's throwing things.
It demands an immediate response.
Exactly. But if you look closely at that mafia family photo, right behind anger, hiding in the back row, are these other cousins. Deep sadness, profound shame, regret, despair.
The quieter ones?
The quieter ones, but anger is the one commanding the room. So the question we really have to answer is why? What triggers us to draw the sword? What makes us bypass the sadness or the shame and go straight to fury?
And that brings us to the core thesis. Anger is fundamentally a theological alarm bell.
A theological alarm bell. Unpack that for us.
It means anger always reveals what the human heart truly values, what it treasures, or essentially what it worships. We get angry when an idol is threatened, or when an idol is actually removed from our grasp. The mechanism is actually quite simple, even though the real-world application gets very complex.
How does the mechanism work?
Well, anger rises in the heart when something we deeply value is either threatened with loss or taken from us. The authors comb through the historical narratives and identify 4 specific treasures that, when threatened, consistently trigger human fury.
Let's dig into the first of those 4 treasures. Control.
The big one.
Yeah, the desire for control. I make plans, I dream dreams, I want my department at work to run my way, I want my family to execute my schedule perfectly.
And when they don't?
When you get in my way, I get angry. The text anchors this concept by looking at ancient biblical kings, which makes sense because who expects to have more control than an absolute monarch?
Right. They are the ultimate case studies in control.
Take King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon in the book of Daniel. He has this deeply troubling dream, but he doesn't just ask his civil servants, the magicians and astrologers, to interpret it.
No, he takes it a massive step further.
He demands they tell him what the actual dream was first, just to prove they aren't fakes.
And when they tell him that is a completely impossible request for any human being, he throws a furious tantrum. He orders all the wise men of Babylon to be executed.
Just a total meltdown.
Total meltdown. And if we use a historical grammatical approach here, meaning we read the text exactly as the original author intended for the original audience, really looking closely at their history, the culture of the ancient Near East, the grammar, we see just how profound this reaction is.
Because he's not just a guy having a bad day at the office.
Exactly. Nebuchadnezzar is the emperor of Babylon. He is arguably the most powerful man on the planet at that specific time in history. He operates under the daily, unquestioned assumption that his control is absolute.
Right, whatever he says goes.
He commands massive armies, he builds unimaginable cities, and he dictates life and death on a whim. So when his own civil servants look at him and say, "We cannot do what you command," he meets the immovable limits of his own control.
And he can't handle it.
That realization of limitation erupts instantly into rage. It's the alarm bell going off.
And he does the exact same thing later in the book. He builds this massive golden statue, commands everyone in the empire to bow down to it, and 3 Hebrew men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they refuse.
Yeah, they won't comply.
And the text notes that the actual expression on his face literally changes. He is filled with fury, his illusion of ultimate control is defied, so his immediate reaction is to draw the sword.
We see this exact dynamic with King Saul, too. His paranoid, homicidal fury at David.
Oh, that's a tragic one.
It really is. The women in the streets are singing, Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s.
It's just a little pop song, basically.
Right. But Saul hears that, and he realizes his kingdom, his control, his entire legacy is slipping away to a younger, more popular rival.
His treasure is threatened.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what does he do? He spends the rest of his life throwing literal spears at David and hunting him like an animal in the wilderness.
Or consider King Herod in the New Testament. He hears rumors from the Magi about a new king of the Jews being born.
Another massive threat to control.
Yeah, Herod's entire identity is wrapped up in his political control over Judea, a control that he maintained through extreme documented brutality.
He was notoriously paranoid.
So the mere rumor of a threat to his power sends him into an infanticidal rage. He orders the slaughter of the young boys in Bethlehem. The alarm bell of his heart was just screaming that his treasure, his control, was under attack.
Now, I read these accounts, and it is so incredibly easy to look down on these ancient tyrannical kings.
Oh, for sure. We read it and think, what monsters.
We judge Herod, we judge Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah.
But honestly, if we bring this into the 21st century, aren't we doing the exact same thing when the Wi-Fi drops in the middle of a crucial Zoom meeting?
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or when a toddler absolutely refuses to put their shoes on when we are already 10 minutes late for school. We aren't losing the Babylonian Empire.
No, we're not.
But we are losing our tiny imagined kingdoms, our little personal domains of control.
That is precisely the diagnostic the authors are aiming for. The scale is vastly different, obviously, but the fundamental heart condition is identical. The theological alarm bell is ringing in us, just like it was in them.
Let's look at another example of this. Think about King David bringing the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem.
This is such a fascinating story.
It is. This is meant to be a joyous, highly orchestrated religious festival. David is the king, and he's managing this grand parade. He's got it all planned out.
But he don't follow the actual instructions for how to move it, right?
Exactly. And then a man named Uzzah reaches out to steady the ark on the cart because the oxen stumbled, touches it, and is instantly struck dead by God's holiness.
Just boom, dead.
And what is David's immediate reaction? The text explicitly says David was angry and David was afraid.
Why the anger, though?
Well, he wasn't just terrified of God's lethal holiness. He was angry because his carefully controlled, deeply meaningful religious event was entirely ruined.
He lost control of the narrative.
Yes, he lost control, and his immediate response was indignation, even against God.
That brings us to the second treasure, possessions.
Oh, this is a big one for our culture.
Definitely. It's the attitude of, I want something, it's mine, or I think it should be mine. And the classic biblical narrative here is King Ahab in Naboth's vineyard.
Almost a pathetic story, really.
It is. Ahab looks at the window of his palace, sees a beautiful vineyard next door, and just decides he wants it for a vegetable garden. He offers to buy it, but Naboth refuses.
Because it wasn't just real estate to Naboth.
Right. Naboth explains that this vineyard is his ancestral inheritance. In Israelite theology, land wasn't just property you could flip. It was a sacred trust given by God to specific tribes and families.
So Naboth literally cannot sell it without violating his conscience and the law of God.
Exactly. So how does the king of Israel respond to hearing the word no from a regular citizen?
Does he respect the theological boundaries?
Nope. He goes to his bedroom, lies down on his bed, turns his face to the wall, and refuses to eat.
Like a toddler.
Literally pouting like a sullen child. It is a pathetic picture of frustrated desire. Ahab's sullen vexation is this simmering, slow anger over a possession he firmly believes he is entitled to.
And that slow anger is dangerous.
So dangerous. It eventually creates the environment for terrible murder, which is orchestrated by his wife, Jezebel. She has Naboth falsely accused of blasphemy and stoned to death just so Ahab can get his little garden.
But the root of all that bloodshed is simply the frustrated desire for possession.
It is the grown-up version of throwing yourself on the floor in the toy aisle at the supermarket. We just hide it better.
Well, or do we? I mean, think about the absolute meltdown people have over a delayed package today.
Oh, true. I paid for 2 days shipping.
Exactly. It's out of stock. But I want it now. It's that exact same royal entitlement. I desire this possession, therefore reality itself must bend to give it to me.
That's so convicted. So the third treasure identified in the text is sexual intimacy. And here, the biblical framework is profoundly realistic about human nature.
It doesn't shy away from the hard realities.
Not at all. God designed sexual intimacy to be highly valued, but specifically within the protective covenantal bounds of marriage.
Yeah.
Because it is designed to be so deeply unifying, when that exclusivity is violated, anger is the natural and, frankly, appropriate response.
It's meant to be fiercely protected.
Right. The book of Proverbs, specifically chapter 6, warns the adulterer that the jealousy of a wronged husband will make him absolutely furious. He will not accept any ransom or compensation.
Meaning you can't buy him off.
Right. The value placed on that intimacy is so incredibly high that its theft results in a boundless, consuming anger.
But the authors also explore the deeply twisted dark side of this. What happens when sexual desire operates completely outside of God's design?
And this gets into some really heavy, dark territory.
It does. The text points us to the horrifying story in Kivi Samuel regarding Amnon and Tamar. Amnon is a son of David, and he becomes entirely obsessed with his half-sister Tamar.
It's a deeply disturbing narrative.
He makes himself physically sick with lust. He plots. He tricks her into coming into his bedroom. He abuses his physical power, and he violently assaults her.
But it's the detail immediately following the assault that the authors really hone in on.
Yes. The text says Amnon then hated her with a hatred that was greater than the lust he had just felt for her moments before.
Why does that violent flip happen? It seems almost incomprehensible.
It happens because the expectation of sexual satisfaction, when it is pursued through violence, coercion, and sin, never actually delivers what it promises.
Because sin is inherently deceitful.
Exactly. Amnon believed the lie that possessing her body would give him ultimate delight and satisfaction. Instead, because there was no true intimacy, no covenantal love, no mutual self-giving, he is left feeling utterly empty.
He gets what he wants, and it turns to ash.
He experiences the profound degradation of his own sin, and instead of repenting, which is what he should have done, his frustrated expectation twists instantly into a dark, abusive hatred directed at the victim.
He blames her.
Yes. He expected heaven, he experienced the hell of his own making, and he blamed her. It is a terrifying, sobering picture of how tangled sexual desire, power, and anger become when they are severed from God's created order.
Wow. That brings us to the final treasure on the list. Reputation or wounded pride.
Oh, this is the one we all struggle with, whether we admit it or not.
I deeply want people to think well of me. I want to be respected. And the authors give us this almost comedic yet highly instructive example from the book of Numbers, the story of Balaam and his donkey.
One of the strangest stories in the Old Testament.
It really is. Balaam is a pagan prophet, and he is writing with highly important political dignitaries. He wants to look good.
He's all about his brand.
Yes, his brand. Suddenly his donkey sees the angel of the Lord blocking the path and refuses to move. It crushes Balaam's foot against a wall and eventually just lies down in the middle of the road.
And Balaam is entirely blind to the angel.
Right, so Balaam just looks like a total idiot in front of the very men he's trying to impress. He beats the donkey mercilessly, and when God miraculously opens the donkey's mouth to speak, Balaam yells, "You have made a fool of me. I wish I had a sword in my hand, for I would kill you."
He is literally having an argument with livestock.
He literally wants to execute his farm animal because his reputation was damaged in front of his peers.
It's funny, but we see a much more dangerous world historical version of that exact same wounded pride with King Xerxes in the Book of Esther.
This one is far from comedic.
Yes, Xerxes throws a massive months-long party to show off the wealth of his empire. In the middle of a drunken feast, he commands Queen Vashti to come out wearing her royal crown to display her beauty to his friends.
He essentially wants to show her off as a trophy.
Exactly. But Vashti refuses to be paraded around, and Xerxes just completely loses his mind. He throws a fit that results in a massive imperial decree.
All because she said no.
Why? Because she damaged his reputation in front of the princes of the empire. He was publicly snubbed, his authority was questioned, and his pride was deeply wounded.
If that exact scenario played out today, it would be a trending topic worldwide.
Oh, absolutely.
Vashti would have a massive social media following, and the whole internet would be mercilessly laughing at the king.
He'd be a meme.
He would. But looking at all these examples, Nebuchadnezzar's power, Ahab's vineyard, Amnon's lust, Xerxes' pride, they feel so vastly different on the surface. How do we untangle the actual mechanics of what is happening in the brain and the heart in these moments?
The authors argue there is a rational sequence to all of this. It's not just random.
What's the sequence?
Drawing on a synthesis of both philosophy and biblical counseling, specifically nouthetic counseling, which relies on the sufficiency of Scripture to understand the soul, they break down the cognitive dimension of anger into a three-step sequence.
Okay, lay it out for us.
First is perception. You perceive an event. You see the donkey sit down, or you hear the queen say no, or you see that passive-aggressive email from your boss.
So that the data comes in.
Right. Second is appraisal. And this is the crucial step. You evaluate the event against your desires. You decide that you don't like it. You appraise the event as a direct threat to your treasure, whether that is your control, your possessions, or your reputation.
It's the judgment phase.
Exactly. Third is the emotion. The physiological and psychological response follows the appraisal. Your heart rate spikes, your face flushes, the adrenaline hits. The physical rage is actually a rational, albeit often profoundly sinful response to your internal appraisal of the situation.
So if anger comes from our desires being thwarted and our treasures being threatened, what is the ultimate desire beneath all of those?
What's at the very bottom?
Yeah. If we keep digging past the desire for control, past the desire for reputation, what is the root system feeding all of these different trees?
If you trace all of these thwarted desires down to the absolute bedrock of the human heart, you find the original deception from Genesis chapter 3.
The original sin.
Yes, the desire to literally be God.
The madness of playing God. In the Garden of Eden, the serpent looks at Eve and says, "You will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God."
You will be like God. That's the hook.
And humanity has never recovered from swallowing that lie.
We really haven't. The foundational delusional premise of the corrupted human heart, what theologians refer to when they talk about total depravity, is that we should be the sovereign rulers of our own universe.
We want the throne.
We truly believe, on a subconscious level, that we should possess whatever we desire, control whatever we survey, and receive the glory and submission we think we deserve. It is the core delusion underlying all other sins.
What I find so striking about the author's analysis here is how they highlight the sheer irrationality of this.
The insanity of it, really.
Yes. In our daily lives, we operate under this insane premise that the universe should automatically bend to our sovereign will. The authors use this brilliant analogy about assembling flat pack furniture.
Oh, this hits so close to home.
Doesn't it? Imagine it is 2:00 a.m. You are exhausted. You are sitting on the floor surrounded by cardboard trying to put together a cheap bookshelf.
I've been there.
We all have.
Yeah.
You are trying to get a specific screw to catch in the pre-drilled hole, and it just keeps stripping the wood. It won't work, and suddenly you absolutely lose your mind. You throw the screwdriver across the room. You are furious.
Over a piece of wood.
Why? Why does a piece of particle board evoke genuine fury? Because your total inability to control a cheap piece of wood shatters your delusion of divine omnipotence. You are acting as if an inanimate object owes you its submission.
That perfectly captures the insanity of the human condition. In our pretending to be God mode, we constantly create our sovereign, perfect plans for the cosmos.
Even if the cosmos is just our living room.
Right. Now, our plan for the cosmos might simply be having a quiet, uninterrupted Saturday afternoon on the couch. But when someone or something resists our will, a neighbor starts up a loud leaf blower or the dog gets sick on the rug, we blaze with fury.
How dare they interrupt my plans?
Exactly. We get angry at traffic jams. We get angry at the weather. We act as if the clouds have committed a moral offense against our divine right to a dry commute.
It's so embarrassing when you say it out loud.
It is. And this explains why anger feels so intensely self-righteous and justifying in the heat of the moment, yet feels so deeply embarrassing and silly in the cold light of day. We are finite, limited creatures raging against the reality that we are not infinite.
We are finite creatures raging that we aren't infinite. That is a profound diagnosis. But, this God complex doesn't just make us look silly when we're yelling at an IKEA bookshelf.
No, it has real casualties.
It has a deeply sinister progression. Because when you have a world filled with 8 billion human beings who all secretly want to sit on the throne of the universe, catastrophic collision is entirely inevitable.
It's mathematically guaranteed.
If I am determined to rule and you are standing in my way, I have to remove you.
Precisely. The drawn sword demands a victim. The authors detail 3 distinct phases of this destructive harm. The first is hot, explosive anger.
The volcano.
Yes. This is the sudden catastrophic outburst. We see this brilliantly illustrated with Potiphar in the book of Genesis.
Oh, with Joseph.
Right. Joseph is serving faithfully as the head of Potiphar's household. Potiphar's wife falsely accuses Joseph of attempted assault. The text says Potiphar's anger was kindled.
He doesn't even pause.
Not for a second. Immediately, without an investigation, without asking Joseph for his side of the story, without any semblance of a trial, Joseph is thrown into the dungeon. Explosive anger is entirely reactionary.
It skips the whole process of finding the truth.
It doesn't wait for evidence.
Yeah.
It creates a terrifying atmosphere of sheer unpredictability for everyone around the angry person.
We see a tragic example of explosive anger with Moses, too, which is so sad because for most of his life, Moses is described as the meekest man on earth. He is incredibly self-controlled.
He put up with a lot.
He really did. But at the waters of Meribah, faced with yet another thirsty, complaining, rebellious crowd of Israelites, he finally snaps. God tells him to speak to the rock to bring forth water.
Just speak to it.
But instead, in a hot explosion of rage, Moses screams at the people and strikes the rock twice with his staff. The outburst costs him entry into the promised land.
A lifetime of work derailed in a moment.
So that's the first face. The second face of harm is slow, nursed anger.
And this one is arguably much more terrifying.
Why do you say that?
Because this isn't the sudden explosion. This is cold, premeditated malice. Hot anger might result in a sudden bar brawl, but slow anger plots and plans.
Give us a biblical example of that.
Think about the first murder in human history. Cain and Abel. Cain doesn't kill his brother in a sudden fit of rage right there at the altar when his sacrifice is rejected.
He stews on it.
He does. And if we look at the historical grammatical details, specifically incorporating variants found in the Septuagint, which is the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament completed a couple of centuries before Christ, we see an expanded detail where Cain deliberately says to Abel, "Let us go out to the field."
He lures him.
Yes. He lured his brother away from their parents out into the isolation of the wilderness where no one could intervene. That requires cold calculation.
That is chilling.
Or consider Simeon and Levi in Genesis 34. A prince of the city of Shechem assaults their sister Dinah. Instead of immediate retaliation, Simeon and Levi pretend to make a covenant of peace with the men of Shechem.
They use a religious rite as a weapon.
Exactly. They convince men to be circumcised, they wait 3 whole days until the men are physically incapacitated by pain, and then they walk into the city and commit absolute genocide.
3 days of waiting? That takes a dark kind of patience.
Slow anger treasures the feeling of wrath itself. It nurses the grievance, feeding it, keeping it alive like a dark, beloved pet, until the perfect moment to strike.
We see that with Haman in the book of Esther, too. He is so furious at one Jewish man, Mordecai, for refusing to bow to him, that he literally casts lots like rolling dice every day for a whole year to determine the astrologically perfect day to exterminate the entire Jewish population.
The patience of his hatred is staggering.
It really is. And then the authors outline a third face: frustrated anger.
Yes.
This is what happens when you draw the sword, but someone or something holds your arm back. You desperately want to strike, but you can't act on it because of circumstances or lack of power. So what do?
You turn the sword inward.
This takes us back to King Ahab sulking on his bed, right?
Exactly. The authors point out that secular psychodynamic literature, the psychological studies tracing back to Freud that explore the subconscious roots of emotion, has long identified many forms of depression as anger turned inward.
Oh, that's fascinating.
When you cannot express your rage outward at the object of your frustration, you swallow it. It metastasizes into a sullen, depressive sulk, a pervasive bitterness that poisons the soul from the inside out.
But the biblical authors knew this way before modern psychology.
Long before. The biblical text understood this dynamic millennia before modern psychology gave it a clinical name.
Now, if we pivot back to how anger manifests outwardly, we really have to look at the intersection of anger and the abuse of power, particularly in leadership.
This is a massive issue today.
It really is. And this is an area where the biblical worldview presented in the text provides a massive, heavy critique of our modern culture. Because whether we are talking about the corporate world, professional sports, or even some high-level ministries, we routinely glorify the angry leader.
We reward them.
We do. We praise the hairdryer treatment, the football coach or the tech CEO who gets 2 inches from a subordinate's face and just screams obscenities at them. We rebrand that rage.
We call it passion.
We say it's the mark of a visionary leader who demands excellence and won't let anything stop their goals.
But the authors, operating from the foundational belief that Scripture is the sufficient guide for human behavior, wholly reject that cultural premise.
What?
Let's revisit Moses at the rock at Meribah.
Okay, let's unpack that more.
Why was his anger considered so catastrophic by God?
Because God intended to provide water for the people as a pure miracle of grace. Despite their rebellion, he wanted to show his mercy.
God wanted to be the hero?
Yes, but Moses usurps that moment. He yells, "Here now, you rebels! Shall we bring water for you out of this rock?
Shall we? Wow.
Notice the pronoun. In his anger, Moses made the miracle about himself. He replaced God. Angry leadership always does exactly that. The screaming coach, or the volatile CEO, is effectively saying, I am the ultimate authority here, my will is supreme, and I am furious because I am not getting the submission I demand. So how does the biblical framework actually address this practically? Because human organizations, including the church, require leadership and structure. How do you prevent the visionary leader from becoming the angry dictator?
The biblical model for church government directly addresses this vulnerability structurally. If you look at the pastoral epistles, Titus and 1 Timothy, the text outlines the qualifications for an overseer or an elder.
Character requirements.
Exactly. It explicitly mandates that a leader must not be arrogant or quick-tempered. They must be gentle.
Gentle is not a word we usually associate with CEOs.
No, it's not. Furthermore, the New Testament model for local church leadership is not a single CEO-style pastor ruling with absolute authority. It is designed to be a plurality of qualified men shepherding the congregation collaboratively.
Shared leadership.
This shared humble authority is a direct structural safeguard against the manipulative control, bullying, and isolation of a singular leader who might try to operate with a God complex.
That makes total sense. And the authors carry that exact same structural framework right into the home.
Yes, the family dynamic is crucial here.
It is important to note that the authors evaluate family dynamics through a complementarian view. For those unfamiliar with the term, this means they see men and women as entirely equal in dignity, worth, and value before God, but designed with distinct complementary roles within the family.
Where the husband is called to loving, sacrificial leadership.
Exactly. The authors argue that when a husband allows anger to take root, whether that manifests as explosive, intimidating screaming or the slow, agonizing punishment of the silent treatment, that biblical calling is completely perverted.
He abdicates his actual role.
He is no longer reflecting the sacrificial love of Christ. He is using his position to crush his family. He turns what should be a sanctuary of peace into a place of emotional murder.
That observation about the silent treatment is absolutely critical. People often mistake the silent treatment for self-control.
I'm not yelling, so I'm doing good.
Right. They think, well, I'm not screaming, so I'm not angry.
Yeah.
But the authors diagnose the silent treatment as a deeply aggressive act.
It's a weapon.
It is. It is a way of using your relational power to communicate, you do not exist to me until you completely submit to my will. It is a form of punitive isolation. It is, once again, the human attempt to act like God, withholding presence and affection to enforce compliance.
Which is a terrifying realization when you think about it. But as bad as explosive anger or the silent treatment can be, the authors argue there is a form of anger that is even more toxic and even more difficult to cure.
The hardest one to crack.
What happens when our anger isn't just a loss of control, but is securely tied to a deep, unshakable conviction that we are morally right?
This is the immense danger of self-righteous anger. It is the mentality that says, I am not just mad, I am entirely justified in my madness. God is on my side.
The ultimate trump card.
The authors devote significant time to exploring anger allied to religious certainty. And we should clarify, this doesn't just apply to people sitting in church pews. Secularism, political ideologies, and cultural movements can all function as religions with their own rigid dogmas and heresy.
Oh, absolutely. We see that everywhere today.
But if we look at the biblical establishment's reaction to the prophets, we see this toxicity perfectly clearly.
Let's talk about Jeremiah. The prophet Jeremiah stands in the temple courtyard and tells the religious elites that God is going to judge their empty, hypocritical rituals and allow the temple to be destroyed.
And how do they react?
Their response isn't to debate him on theological grounds. They scream, "You shall die."
Immediate violence.
Jesus comes into the temple centuries later, makes a whip, and cleanses the courtyard of the corrupt money changers. The religious leaders immediately begin plotting to murder him.
They don't reflect on their own corruption.
Not for a second. Or look at the deacon Stephen in Acts chapter 7. He preaches a blistering sermon recounting Israel's history of rejecting God's messengers. The text says the religious council was so enraged that they literally ground their teeth at him like animals before dragging him out and stoning him.
That is such a vivid, horrifying image.
This wasn't minor annoyance. It was lethal, uncontrollable fury. Why? Because their fundamental religious plausibility structures, the entire systems they built to justify their own righteousness, were being threatened.
And if we dig down into the theology of why those plausibility structures are so fiercely defended, we hit a profound, very uncomfortable truth about the human condition.
Which is?
The authors, operating from a theological framework that views humanity as fundamentally corrupted by sin, argue that the human heart defaults naturally to a works righteousness mindset.
We want to earn it.
We desperately want to earn our keep. We want to be able to hand God or the universe or society a resume and say, look at my morality, look at my correct politics, look at my religious observance. You owe me blessing.
Get it what I did.
Therefore, the concept of free, unmerited grace is absolutely offensive to the natural human heart. It infuriates us.
I really want us to spend some time here because this is so counterintuitive to modern thinking. We like to think everyone loves the idea of grace.
In theory, sure.
But free grace implies total human inability. It implies that we are spiritually bankrupt, morally helpless, and can do absolutely nothing to save ourselves. And human pride violently rejects that.
It's the ultimate insult to the ego.
We see this all over the text. Look at Cain again. Why was he really mad? He brought an offering of his own hard work from the soil. God rejected it, but accepted Abel's animal sacrifice, which was offered by faith. Cain was furious that God accepted faith over his hard work.
His resume was rejected.
Or look at Naaman in 2 Kings. He is a powerful, wealthy Syrian general suffering from leprosy. He travels to the prophet Elisha, fully expecting to pay a massive fortune and participate in some dramatic, complex ritual to earn his healing.
It wants to perform a great feat.
Right, but Elisha doesn't even come to the door. He sends a servant to tell Naaman to simply go wash in the muddy Jordan River 7 times.
And Naaman flies into a rage. He says, "Are not the rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel?" He wanted to be the hero of his own healing. The sheer simplicity of free grace insulted his pride.
It made him furious.
We see the exact same dynamic in the book of Jonah. God shows entirely free, unmerited mercy to the wicked, violent city of Nineveh after they repent. Jonah is furious.
He literally says he wants to die. He's so mad.
He prays to God, effectively saying, "I knew you were gracious and merciful, and I hate it." He hated it because Nineveh hadn't earned it.
And of course, this all culminates in Jesus' parable of the prodigal son. The older brother refuses to enter the celebration feast because his rebellious, wasteful younger brother is freely forgiven.
The older brother is the picture of self-righteous anger.
He stands outside in the dark, furious, telling his father, "Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command." He is outraged by grace because it renders his flawless resume completely irrelevant.
That dynamic perfectly explains our violent reaction to correction, too. The authors quote Proverbs 9, "Whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse."
Which is universally true.
Have you ever tried to correct someone even gently and they absolutely explode at you?
Yes, and I've been the one exploding too.
Right. Why do we hate being corrected so much? The authors trace this right back to the core delusion. If you are pretending to be God, sitting on the throne of your life, you don't just have to pretend to be all-powerful. You have to pretend to be omniscient.
You have to know everything.
Your opinions must be flawless. So when someone corrects your theology or your work presentation or your parenting, they are puncturing your delusion of omniscience. They are reminding you that you are ignorant and finite.
That is why the Pharisees hated Jesus with such venom.
Exactly. He didn't just disagree with their theology. He publicly proved they were ignorant of the very texts they claimed to master. He would constantly ask them, "Have you not read?"
Which had to be so humiliating for them.
It was. And because they refused to repent, they decided to murder the man, exposing their ignorance.
What makes self-righteous anger so particularly dangerous is that it rarely stays isolated. It is highly infectious.
It spreads like a virus.
The authors spend time analyzing the viral nature of mob anger. There is a fascinating moment in the Gospels when Mary of Bethany breaks an expensive flask of perfume to anoint Jesus' feet.
Well, this is a great case study in mob dynamics.
John's Gospel tells us that Judas Iscariot was the first to object, criticizing the financial waste under the guise of caring for the poor. But Matthew's Gospel tells us that the disciples, plural, were indignant. How do we reconcile that?
The authors suggest a very natural progression. Judas grumbled first. He voiced his self-righteous, seemingly moral indignation. And like a virus, that anger infected the person next to him and the person next to them until the entire room of 12 grown men was unified in serious indignation against this woman's act of worship.
It is the exact psychological mechanism of a modern social media algorithm.
Outrage is contagious.
The authors point to the Ephesian riot in Acts chapter 19 as the ancient equivalent of a Twitter dogpile. Paul is preaching the gospel in Ephesus, and people are abandoning their pagan idols. A silversmith named Demetrius realizes this is going to hurt his idol-making business.
Hit him right in the wallet.
So he stirs up his fellow tradesmen, wrapping his financial panic in religious outrage about the honor of the goddess Artemis. They take to the streets. Soon, the entire city of Ephesus is rioting in the massive outdoor theater, screaming, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians!" for 2 solid hours.
Sheer chaos must have been terrifying.
But Luke, the author of Acts, brilliantly notes in the text that most of them did not know why they had come together.
That is such a vital detail. It demonstrates how crowds completely abolish nuance and critical thinking. Sociologists talk about how we are deeply influenced by the emotional currents of our peer groups.
We want to belong.
If your social circle values a specific political ideology or a specific cultural norm, any perceived threat to that norm makes the entire group angry simultaneously. In a crowd, you experience this intoxicating rush of shared self-righteous fury.
It feels good in the moment.
It feels incredibly unifying to hate the same enemy. You are convinced that we are entirely right and they are entirely evil. And just like the Ephesian mob, half the people caught up in an internet outrage cycle couldn't even accurately articulate the original issue. They are just addicted to the communal adrenaline of the drawn sword.
So hearing all of this, the destruction of families, the explosion of mobs, the toxicity of self-righteousness, the deep delusion of playing God, I have to ask the question that I know is in the listener's mind.
Is there any place for it?
Yeah, is there any place for human anger? What about righteous indignation? Because surely, as we look around the world, there are things we absolutely should be mad about.
The authors don't shy away from that tension. The short answer is yes, human anger can be righteous. But they offer a massive caveat.
Which is?
It is exceedingly rare. They note that the examples of purely righteous human anger in the biblical text are few and far between.
But there are some, right?
Yes. We see Moses coming down from Mount Sinai, seeing the Israelites worshiping the golden calf in a massive orgiastic idol festival. His anger burns hot, he shatters the tablets of the law, and in that specific moment, his anger is entirely aligned with God's holy jealousy.
Okay, any others?
We see the Spirit of God rush upon King Saul early in his reign, granting him righteous anger to defend the helpless people of Jabesh Gilead from mutilation. We see John the Baptist looking at the corrupt, hypocritical religious leaders and furiously calling them a brood of vipers.
And Paul in Athens, too.
Yes, Paul in Athens, whose spirit was provoked, and the Greek word there denotes deep irritation and anger, because he saw a city utterly consumed by idolatry that was insulting the glory of God.
Okay, so the category definitely exists, but how do we know the difference? I mean, I want to push back on the authors a little bit here. It's easy to say don't be selfishly angry. But what about when we are the victims of systemic injustice? What about victims of abuse? How do we untangle our selfish anger over being inconvenienced from righteous anger over actual oppression? When has our anger crossed the line into sin?
That is the critical question, and it's where the authors draw a very sharp diagnostic line. It comes down to imitation versus replacement.
Explain that.
We are called as image bearers to imitate God's holy hatred of evil. The authors are clear that if we're going to be angry, it should be about systemic evils. They specifically list things like human exploitation, deep injustices in our legal systems, and abortion. We should be angry at the destruction of human life and dignity.
Right. We shouldn't be apathetic to that.
But the problem of the human heart is that we almost always slip from imitating God to replacing him. The diagnostic question is, whose honor is being defended?
That's a piercing question.
The moment the anger becomes primarily about my honor being offended, my rights being trampled, or my convenience being compromised, rather than God's honor and the actual well-being of the victim, the anger is polluted.
One of the authors gives this incredibly relatable, humbling analogy in the text. He talks about driving down the road and almost getting hit by a car that aggressively cut him off without using a turn signal.
Oh, the classic road rage scenario.
Right. He immediately felt this massive surge of what he told himself was righteous anger. He justifies it in his head. I am angry because this driver breached the moral order of society. Laws must be obeyed for the safety of the community. I am angry for justice.
Sounds very noble.
It does, but then he stops and does the diagnostic work. He admits that if he had been sitting on his front porch and seen that exact same car cut off a total stranger down the block, he might have shaken his head, but he wouldn't have been furious.
His heart rate wouldn't have spiked.
Exactly. His heart wouldn't be pounding. The reality was, his righteous anger was almost entirely tainted by self-interest. He was mad because he was personally endangered and inconvenienced.
It is a brilliant self-diagnosis. When righteous anger slips into unrighteous anger, it is almost always because I have smuggled myself back onto the throne of the universe.
I made myself the center again.
This happens in ministry all the time. A pastor might stand on the pulpit, raising his voice, pounding the podium, convinced he is preaching the righteous wrath of God against the sins of the culture.
But what's really happening?
Well, the congregation sitting in the pews can clearly hear the underlying tone. They know it's not the holy grief of God. It's just an angry, frustrated man venting his own personal grievances because church attendance is down or the culture isn't listening to him anymore. The drawn sword is almost impossible for a human being to wield without cutting themselves or innocent bystanders.
Which leaves us in a terrifying position. If we are totally incapable of wielding the sword of anger perfectly, what is the cure? Do we just suppress it? Do we pretend evil doesn't exist?
Not at all.
The biblical cure presented by the authors is actually shocking to modern sensibilities. The way to lay down our corrupted swords is not to stop believing in anger, but to trust entirely in the perfect, good anger of God.
And this requires a massive shift in worldview, because modern culture hates the idea of an angry God.
They despise it.
You see this constantly in the pushback against historical theology. Think of the visceral reaction people have to Jonathan Edwards' famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. There was an entire cottage industry of books and podcasts today dedicated to deconstructing that idea, arguing that a truly loving God could never experience wrath.
They want to reinvent God as exclusively affirming, just a giant cosmic therapist.
But the authors argue that the theological framework of Scripture demands we recognize a difficult truth. A God without wrath is a God without love. If God looks at human trafficking, abuse, and exploitation and does not feel a holy, burning hatred toward it, he cannot possibly be good.
I really want us to do a deep dive into the theology of that, because the authors bring up the classical orthodox doctrine of divine simplicity to explain this. This is a concept that a lot of people have never heard of, but it completely changes how you view God. Explain what it means that God doesn't have Lego pieces.
The doctrine of divine simplicity is a foundational pillar of historical Christian orthodoxy. It simply means that God is not made up of constituent parts.
Like a recipe.
Right. He's not a recipe. He is not 50% love, 30% justice, and 20% wrath like a pie chart. He doesn't possess attributes like we do. He is his attributes.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. He is completely, infinitely who he is at all times. He doesn't have love. He is love. He doesn't have holiness. He is holy. Therefore, you cannot separate or oppose his attributes against one another.
So his wrath isn't contrary to his love.
Exactly. His wrath is not him slipping into a bad mood where his love is temporarily pushed aside. His wrath is actually his perfect love and perfect holiness actively reacting against that which destroys what he loves. All that is in God is God.
So when the Apostle Paul writes in Romans 12, "Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God," he isn't telling us to hand our vengeance over to a cosmic tyrant who enjoys torturing people.
No, not at all.
He is saying your anger is flawed, selfish, and destructive. Abandon your broken sword and trust the justice of the universe to the only being whose anger is entirely, purely, and flawlessly good.
And the authors outline 5 specific marks of God's good anger that prove how utterly different he is from us.
Let's walk through those. They are so helpful.
First, God's anger is based on perfect knowledge.
Which ours never is.
Right. When Potiphar threw Joseph in jail, he acted on a lie because his knowledge was finite. But God sees every hidden motive, every deleted text message, every whispered conversation, every trauma. His judgment is flawless because his data is complete.
What's the second mark?
Second, his anger is aroused purely by evil. God doesn't lose his temper because he had a long day or because he was inconvenienced.
He doesn't get hangry.
Exactly. Third, it is utterly fair. The punishment always perfectly fits the crime. He never overreacts. Fourth, it is clearly forewarned. God does not operate with secret rules.
I love the historical example the authors use for that fourth point, the story of King Josiah.
It perfectly illustrates the concept of warning.
Josiah is a young king in Judah. The nation has been steeped in idolatry for generations. Josiah orders the temple to be repaired, and during the construction, the workers find a dusty, forgotten scroll hidden away. It is the Book of the Law.
They literally lost the Bible.
They had. They bring it to the king and read it out loud. When Josiah hears the curses and the covenant requirements, he literally tears his royal robes in grief and terror. He says, Great is the wrath of the Lord that is kindled against us, because our fathers have not obeyed the words of this book.
He realizes they have broken a known covenant.
The point is, God's laws weren't arbitrary traps set to catch them. He had given humanity clear written warnings. The boundaries were always known.
And the fifth mark of God's good anger is that it aims at the ultimate destruction of evil. It has a righteous goal: the restoration of a perfect, uncorrupted universe.
But the authors anticipate an objection here.
Always good to address the skeptic.
A skeptic might hear all this and say, okay, sure, you have this theoretical concept of God's anger reserved for some distant, mythical judgment day in the clouds, but it has no bearing on reality today. The authors argue forcefully that God's anger is absolutely evident today. It is visible in the world right now.
Yes, primarily in three ways.
The first way is through human justice systems. Romans 13 is the classic text here, stating that governing authorities bear the sword as agents of God's wrath against wrongdoers.
Now, obviously, human courts are deeply flawed and often corrupt.
Very flawed. But the very concept of justice, the fact that when a murderer is caught, tried, and sentenced to prison, society feels a sense of rightness, is a pale, imperfect reflection of God's righteous anger against violence.
It proves we have a category for just wrath.
The second way is the self-destructiveness of sin. The book of Psalms, specifically Psalm 7, talks about the wicked man digging a deep pit to trap others and then falling into it himself.
It's the built-in consequence.
When a greedy, cutthroat corporate executive climbs the ladder by destroying others, but ends up on his deathbed completely miserable, isolated, and despised by his family, that built-in consequence is a display of God's wrath against greed.
The third way is what the Apostle Paul describes in Romans chapter 1 as moral disorder. The text describes the wrath of God being revealed by God giving them up to their dishonorable passions and a debased mind.
God giving them up.
This is God's passive judgment. It is God stepping back and saying, you demand to be your own God. You demand to live outside my design. I will grant your request and you will reap the natural harvest of that rebellion.
The authors use a striking and frankly provocative modern example here, don't they?
They do. They argue that the sexual revolution of the 1960s and 70s, which promised complete liberation from traditional sexual ethics, actually resulted in a wave of relational brokenness, soaring divorce rates, fatherless homes, and immense psychological misery for the children of that generation.
It's a heavy observation.
The authors frame this not just as a sociological shift, but as a direct modern application of Romans 1. God's passive judgment, giving a society over to what it demands, allowing the consequences of rebellion to be baked right into the rebellion itself.
It is an incredibly sobering reality to consider. Which brings us to the ultimate climactic resolution of this divine anger, because the biblical text holds two realities in tension. On one hand, Exodus 34:6 tells us that God is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. His patience is vast.
But on the other hand, slow does not mean never.
That is a crucial distinction, and here we touch on a core worldview element that frames the entire biblical narrative, the reality of the impending day of the Lord.
Yes, the eschatological reality.
Yeah. The authors operate from a framework that views biblical history as unfolding toward a literal, specific, and prophesied end times timeline, often referred to in theological terms as a dispensational eschatology that anticipates a literal future judgment. The dam of God's patience is holding back the floodwaters of his justice right now, specifically to give humanity time to repent.
That dam will eventually break.
A day is fixed on the calendar where sudden, righteous judgment will be poured out on a rebellious world. John the Baptist stood in the wilderness and asked the religious hypocrites, "Who warned you to flee from the wrath to come?" It is a guaranteed reality.
But before that final day arrives, we have been given the ultimate, breathtaking revelation of the Father's anger in the person of Jesus Christ. And I love that the authors lean on the work of B.B. Warfield here.
Oh, his essay on the emotional life of Jesus is phenomenal.
It's brilliant. We often picture Jesus as this serene, stoic figure floating through the Gospels with a gentle smile, completely unbothered by anything. But Warfield points out that Jesus was a perfect moral being.
And what does that mean practically?
To be perfectly moral means you must be moved to visceral disapproval when confronting evil. When Jesus is in the synagogue in Mark chapter 3, a man with a withered hand is there. The Pharisees are watching Jesus closely, not out of compassion for the man, but hoping Jesus will heal him on the Sabbath so they can accuse him of breaking their religious rules.
They cared more about rules than a suffering man.
Exactly. And the text explicitly says Jesus looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart.
We see that holy zeal again when Jesus makes a whip of cords and physically drives the money changers out of the temple courts. He wasn't just slightly annoyed by the commercialization. He was consumed with zeal for his father's honor because they had turned a place of prayer for the nations into a predatory den of thieves.
But perhaps the most striking, unexpected example of Jesus' anger is found in John chapter 11.
At the tomb of his friend Lazarus.
Yes, we all know the famous, shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. We naturally think of quiet, gentle, sympathetic tears. But if you look at the historical grammatical reality of the original Greek text, it paints a completely different, much more intense picture.
I was blown away when I read this part. The phrase translated in our English Bibles as deeply moved in his spirit uses a Greek word, enebrimisato, that literally denotes a profound, physical, snorting rage.
It is the sound a warhorse makes when it smells the blood of battle.
At the tomb of Lazarus, Jesus was furious. He wasn't just sad that his friend died. He was raging against the violent, unnatural tyranny of sin and death. He was looking at the skeleton face of the world, seeing the grief, the tears, the gaping graves, and the destruction that Satan's original deception had wrought on humanity.
He was consumed with righteous, holy fury against the enemy of death.
He raged at death. But here is the magnificent paradox of the Christian gospel. And this is where all of these threads finally weave together. Jesus was furious at hypocrisy. He raged at death. He hated the corruption of the temple.
But look at what happens next.
Right. Yet just a short time later, when he was personally arrested in the garden, when he was mocked by Herod, when he was spit upon by the guards, when his back was flayed open by a Roman whip, and when unjust men nailed him to a cross, he showed absolutely zero anger.
None.
He didn't curse them. He didn't draw a sword. He didn't call down legions of angels to incinerate the city of Jerusalem, which he easily could have done. Why? How could the moral God of the universe suppress his anger at the greatest injustice in human history?
Because on the cross, he wasn't just a victim. He was the substitute.
Substitutionary atonement.
Yes, he was voluntarily drinking the cup of God's holy wrath for humanity. The spotless Lamb of God was taking the full, unmitigated fury of the Father's righteous anger against human sin, against our selfish control, our greed, our lust, our wounded pride upon himself.
He took a strike.
He absorbed the ultimate strike of the drawn sword so that we wouldn't have to. And because he absorbed that wrath and conquered the grave, the book of Revelation gives us this terrifying and beautiful paradoxical phrase, the wrath of the Lamb.
The wrath of the Lamb.
The only one in the entire universe who has the eternal right to pour out vengeance on the last day is the Lamb who was slain to save us.
It is the ultimate resolution to the problem of human anger. We have covered an immense amount of ground today, looking at the darkest corners of the human heart and the brightest light of the gospel.
We really have.
Let's summarize the practical takeaways for you, the listener, as you go back to your day, your commute, or your family. Based on the author's deeply theological dive, we have 3 things to hold on to.
Number 1.
Number 1, we must learn to be angry at the right things. We need to stop drawing swords over dropped Wi-Fi signals, dented fenders, and bruised egos. If we are going to be angry, it should be a reflection of God's heart anger directed at systemic evil, injustice, exploitation, and abortion.
And number 2.
Number 2, we must look at the terrifying purity of God's anger, recognize our own total inability to stand before a holy God on the merits of our own resumes, and flee to Christ for free grace.
And the final takeaway.
Number 3, we must literally put away our drawn swords. The world does not need more of our flawed, selfish, collateral damage-causing rage. We have to learn the humility of leaving vengeance to God.
And as we close, I want to leave you with one final diagnostic thought to ponder. The next time you feel that hot flush of anger rising in your chest, the racing heart, the clenched jaw, the sudden urge to lash out with a text message or a sharp word, before you draw your sword, force yourself to pause and ask one question.
What's the question?
Whose kingdom is actually being threatened right now? Is it God's kingdom and God's honor, or is it just the tiny, fragile kingdom I've built for myself?
The drawn sword of human relationships. It is a murky, dangerous, often tragic landscape, but the text gives us the ultimate map. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.